On and off the water, when it comes to safety, there is no compromise. So always read and follow all manufacturers' guidelines. Today we're working on the inside of the cabin on my 1994 Bayliner Trophy. I spent 20 hours removing the carpet headliner and scraping carpet glue from every surface in the cabin. The plan is to finish the interior with primer and paint so that I never have to deal with headliner carpet ever again. But there are repairs to do first. The plan is to replace the old floor and finish with paint and non-skid. And many sections have little or no glass. There are voids and thin spots that I want to repair prior to finishing. I'll grind out the voids and air pockets, fill with reinforced resin, add a few layers of glass, and finish with paint. This bulkhead shows a little staining at the bottom, but otherwise is solid. This will clean up well and be a huge improvement over carpet headliner. The workmanship around the cabin door is quite poor. Voids, thin spots, and unsealed exposed plywood were hidden beneath the carpet. Maybe I can find some trim for around the door. Even finished paint would be an improvement at this point. I'll use reinforced resin and tabbing to fix the voids under the walkway, most likely on both sides. This is the ledge that supports the storage shelf in the bow. By finishing this exposed plywood and glassing the shelf, it'll last forever. I'll use the shelf and storage locker lids to test the resin, primer, paint, and non-skid prior to finishing the deck in the fuel tank project. I know that glassing upside down can be an adventure, but it's a clean plywood surface, and I expect it to finish nicely. With tabbing and some 1708, the bow portion of the cabin will be impervious to moisture, adding strength and longevity. Removing the headliner makes electrical wiring a bit of a challenge, so I have chosen to relocate the horn closer to the cockpit. Before final finishing, the window bolts have to be removed and the window resealed, but that can wait. I will keep the windows and main hatch in place for now, but before we finish the glasswork, they will have to be removed. This part of the floor will be replaced, and the bulkhead and locker will get a few layers of glass and be finished with paint. At the edges, the floor is set directly on the hull, so I have to be very careful when cutting. But enough chit-chat already, let's get to it. To mitigate the dust, I tape off the electrical panel, the dash, and the air vents on the engine. I'll be cutting fiberglass and plywood today. I've got eyes and ears and a respirator with a particulate cartridge, gloves, and a Tyvek suit. This will be my first time using the oscillating multi-tool, and I will be collecting dust with a shop vac and my new dust deputy that separates particulates before they go into the canister. When I removed the carpet and the corroded table base a few weeks ago, this is what it looked like, so the entire floor is coming out. This is where I keep my anchor box, so I want this to be solid when I'm done. I can add the base later if I choose, but for now it's a new floor with paint and non-skid. I'm impressed with the multi-tool, even with the cheap metal blade. This hole will allow me to get a better sense of where to make the final cut. The underside of the floor is untreated and totally raw. The plywood is thin and only double layer to support the table base. I can feel the floor is sitting directly on the hull. can see the green adhesive bonding the floor to the hull. Everything Bayliner did was minimal, and this was reflected in the purchase price new. But I was able to cut the plywood exactly without getting into problems. So I'm very happy with the multi-tool. This is what happens to unprotected plywood, even in dry areas like in the cabin. We see all kinds of damage around the hole, with mildew and rot further down toward the step. And here we see that the premium blade has held up very well, even against the harder fiberglass. This is where I keep downrigger cannonballs. So I had previously glassed in several layers of chop strand and woven fabric using the Bondo polyester resin. I didn't know much about glassing at the time, but it held for years and did the job. The multi-tool had to work a lot harder in this section. You can see where glass was added to the bulkhead inside the step. Water passes from here under the deck and fuel tank and into the bilge. This mini bulkhead is practically untreated and is the source for all the mildew on the underside of the cabin floor. All of this has to come out. The round blade was great for perpendicular cuts, but this carbide blade is better suited for flush cuts. The multi-tool is perfect for this challenge. So far, I'm very impressed. But this adhesive was impervious to the multi-tool, so I continue to remove the edges of the plywood and the remaining glass. This demonstrates how effective the tool is. It removed a lot of anxiety I had about doing this job myself. The water that caused this damage came from the bilge and soaked these unprotected materials. I'm surprised to see video of people glassing in plywood with nothing on the underside. On this job, I will use Kusa board to make sure it will never absorb moisture. And the glass is so thin, The blade devours this rotten bulkhead. Knowing that grinding was going to be brutal, I upgraded my PPE and added a new angle grinder with a dust attachment. I don't like the placement of the hose fitting, but it's the best I could do. I added this dust collection cylinder that's supposed to collect 95% or more of the dust before it goes into the vacuum, saving the filters and making cleanup easier. As you can see, the attachment is not very practical. It keeps the dust down, but it's very restricting. I'm only using about ½ an inch of the grinding wheel and not making much headway. I think I'll stick with PVC drains as opposed to mouse holes. Properly sealed, PVC will protect the bulkheads more effectively. This tube is basically connected to the bilge and water does find its way here, so I have to make a watertight path to and from the bilge. I played around with my 1-inch radius sander for a bit, but there was a lot of material to remove. So I used the angle grinder to quickly grind away the remaining tabbing material. This was my first encounter with grinder dust, and despite my best PPE, my first cartridges were not good enough. Next time, I'll need better filters. I'll be using 40 grit paper on the orbital sander and the mini belt sander, but I highly doubt they will be very effective removing large amounts of Gelcoat. The orbital sander connects to my shop vac and I like that. It is compact, so that will help in small places like the storage lockers. However, it just doesn't have the power to remove material and is not suited for this job. To get better access inside the storage lockers, I have to remove the lid supporters first, and the last few bolts have to be drilled out. My plan is to finish the lid covers with paint and non-skid to help hold the seat cushions in place once I paint the benches. Imagine having to do this without the multi-tool. Even though the plywood lasted for 30 years, I want the lids to be more solid than before, and that means fiberglass. But getting a good result on a ½ inch radius isn't easy, and I don't want air pockets causing voids. Glassing and finishing in small places like this will be a challenge. This paint needs to be removed or I will not be able to apply any resin or finishing. This was my first time grinding Gelcoat. It's a nasty business, but the results come quickly. The mini belt sander was slow, but eventually I was able to remove most of the Gelcoat and old paint. And being able to sand the underside made a huge difference and gives me confidence that I can get a good mechanical bond. It was slow, but I was able to reach into some very difficult angles. And without these special tools, this would have been impossible. With the exception of the inner corners, I'm quite pleased with the results so far. I will have to clean up this drainage hole. All the glass in the cabin was covered in carpet and held by thick glue that was incredibly difficult to remove. Now it is clean and ready for a 40 grit grinding. I grind away the voids and the rough spots, and like a rotten tooth, you have to get rid of all of the decay. I mount a wall folder here for my clipboard and fishing license, so it would be better to fill this gap than try to build a radius. But Kusa board only comes in 4x8 sheets, so this might have to be a plywood filler. The grinder does a great job, but this is my first time grinding pure glass, and it's nasty stuff, and it makes me wish I had the full face respirator and a way to extract particles from the air. This was a relatively short process, but every minute of grinding is a health risk. I tried to work in short intervals, letting the air clear and vacuuming the dust each time. Having dust extraction from the contained space would clearly be recommended. Even a cheap face shield would have helped at times. The majority of this dust is wood dust, making it appear worse than it actually was. Surprisingly, I had no itchy reaction or discomfort later that night. And when I was done, I replaced the filters with new ones. I plan to add multiple layers of 1708 on the berth and the hull. So I want an excellent bond and smooth transitions I can work with a fin roller. I remove almost all of the gel coat and will grind away all the rough spots. Now I turn my attention to cleaning up the radius work and removing all the voids using 40 grit paper on low speed. I want a nice smooth base for the tabbing and reinforced resin, and there are a lot of angles in this cabin to contend with. Around every corner is a new void that has to be removed. It looks like Bayliner just sprayed chop strand and called it a day. The dust deputy proved to be as advertised. This dust is incredibly fine and will quickly foul vacuum filters. But the cyclonic action separates it all beforehand, with almost no debris entering the vacuum. This would pair well with a HEPA filter extraction unit and save money on filters. It was money well spent and will be useful for other tools around the shop. And we're back to radius sanding in the ceiling. Residual adhesive in many places, and the glue gums up the sandpaper after only a few minutes. I could not find the sander or the paper available locally anywhere, so I'm forced to order online. So you can't just run down to Rona for new belts. Fresh paper and we're back in business, but it looks like I'll have to take another spin at removing that wretched glue. I try to dig into every crack and corner and create a smooth transition between faces. This is good practice for when I refinish the deck in the fuel tank project. Seems like everywhere I turn, there's a new void or seam that needs trimming. So I take my Sharpie and I mark the trouble spots. These bolts secure the windshield above, but I'm not keen on removing these just yet. They will come out easily enough, but that means I have to get the windshield reglazed, and I have not found the replacement window stripping yet. Who knows if I can even get the right size. The windshield has to come out as part of the Topside project when I refinish the dash and helm areas. If you'd like to be notified about future projects, hit the subscribe button. Back to the Sharpie, and we're marking voids and planning one final grinding stage. So I hit the grinder one more time, targeting my Sharpie marks. This section has a huge void to deal with. Maybe I can slide a thin filler piece and surround it with reinforced resin. With the voids out of the way, it's time for one last 40 grit pass over the main side walls of the hull. This is a large section of multi-layers of glass, and I really want to make sure I get a perfect bond here.